There is a moment, hidden inside your ordinary days, when you will finally stop negotiating with life. Not because you gave up, not because you failed, but because something inside you quietly stopped needing an outcome. And in that exact moment, without any external change at all, everything around you will feel different. You may already know this feeling, even if only for a few seconds. The moment right after you stopped, hoping someone would text back. The moment right after you accepted a loss you had been fighting for months. There was pain first, but then, strangely, there was space. A kind of silence you did not ask for. Ibn Arabi spent much of his life circling this exact mystery, not as a poetic idea, but as a lived spiritual reality. He observed something most people never stop long enough to notice. That the human soul is constantly reaching for something to complete it. A person, a possession, a result, a version of the future. And every time that reaching becomes desperate, life somehow feels smaller, tighter, more fragile. But there is a question underneath all of this that we rarely ask ourselves honestly. What if the reaching itself is the wound? Not the thing you are reaching for. Not its absence. The reaching, stay with that question. We are going to walk through it slowly, because it will not open itself to you quickly. It is not meant to think about the last time you desperately wanted something to happen. A message, a decision, an apology, a result you had worked hard for. Notice what your body did while you were waiting. Most people describe it as tightness, a low current of anxiety running underneath ordinary activities. You could be washing dishes, sitting in traffic, half listening to a conversation, and underneath all of it, some part of you was still checking the door. Still waiting for permission to finally relax. This is not simply impatience. This is what the Sufis call the movement of need. And Ibn Arabi's teaching on divine self-sufficiency, on Allah being described as Al-Ghani, the one free of all need, was never meant to remain an abstract theological statement. It was meant to become a mirror. Because everything that exists other than Allah was described by him as fundamentally poor. Not poor in money, poor in being. Dependent for its very existence, moment to moment, on something beyond itself. This is the beginning of Faqr, not simply having little. Faqr is the direct recognition that you in your very existence are borrowed. Your next breath is not something you manufactured. Your next heartbeat was not something you earned through effort. And if this is true of your existence itself, then how much more true is it of the things you are gripping so tightly to feel secure? Here is where the teaching becomes uncomfortable. Most of us do not experience ourselves as dependent. We experience ourselves as builders. We wake up and we construct a day, a career, a reputation, a family, an identity, and somewhere in that construction, a quiet illusion begins to form. The illusion that if we build carefully enough, control carefully enough, plan carefully enough, we will finally arrive at a version of life that cannot be shaken. Watch yourself carefully here. Think about the effort you put into avoiding uncertainty. The way you check your phone repeatedly after sending an important message, refreshing not because you expect new information, but because the waiting itself feels unbearable. Notice what is actually happening underneath that behavior. It is not simply curiosity. It is the Nafs, the lower self, trying to seize control over something it was never given control over in the first place. The outcome, the other person's response, the future. This is not a character flaw to be ashamed of. It is the default architecture of the human ego. The Nafs survives by convincing you that your peace is located somewhere outside of this present moment, in some future arrangement of circumstances that has not yet happened and may never happen exactly the way you imagined. There is an old contemplative image worth sitting with. Picture a man standing guard outside an empty house. Every night he checks the locks. Every morning he inspects the windows. He tells his neighbors how much responsibility he carries, protecting what is inside. But the house is empty. It has been empty for years. He guards it so faithfully that he has never once gone inside to check. Do not rush past this image. So many of us are guarding identities, reputations, plans, and relationships with the same exhausting vigilance, without ever pausing to ask whether what we are protecting still has anything real inside it. We defend our opinions in arguments not because truth is at stake, but because our sense of self feels tied to being right. We chase recognition at work not purely for growth, but because invisibility feels like a kind of quiet death. We hold on to relationships that have already ended internally, not out of love, but out of fear of the identity collapse that would follow losing them. This is where Ibn Arabi's teaching becomes strangely liberating rather than bleak. If nothing other than Allah possesses independent, self-sufficient existence, then nothing you are clinging to was ever capable of giving you the permanence you were demanding from it in the first place. The wound is not that life keeps taking things from you. The wound is that you were asking created, dependent, ever-changing things to behave like they were eternal. Now bring this into something practical. Think about a person who finally earns enough money to feel secure, only to discover a new and sharper fear has taken root, the fear of losing it. Notice the pattern. The object of attachment changed. The underlying anxiety did not. This tells us something important. The problem was never really about money. The problem was the belief that some external accumulation could finally silence the inner sense of lack. Or think about a person who has built a public image of being spiritually advanced. They speak calmly. They quote wisdom generously, but quietly, uncomfortably. They notice a flicker of disappointment when nobody acknowledges their patience, their charity, their discipline. This is one of the most dangerous illusions on the spiritual path, and Ibn Arabi and many of the early Sufi masters warned against it directly. Seeking status through religion is simply the Nafs finding a more respectable disguise. The performance changes. The underlying hunger for validation remains exactly the same. This is precisely where the ego becomes clever. It does not disappear when you become spiritual. It simply learns new language. So what is the alternative Ibn Arabi is pointing toward? Not indifference, not withdrawal from the world, not pretending you do not care about outcomes. The alternative is something far more radical and far more difficult. It is the direct, felt recognition that your neediness was never actually about the specific object you were chasing. It was about a deeper forgetting, the forgetting that you are already held, already sustained, already provided for by something that does not require your management. This is Tawakkul, often translated simply as trust in Allah. But Ibn Arabi understood it as something closer to a total recalibration of where you locate your security. Not blind passivity. You still work, you still plan, you still care for your responsibilities. But underneath the doing, something in you stops white-knuckling the outcome. There is a difference between possessing something and being possessed by it. A person can have wealth and remain completely free internally, hands open, heart light. Another person can have very little and be utterly enslaved by the fear of losing it. The external condition tells you almost nothing about the internal one. What matters is this: when it is taken, does something in you break, or does something in you simply bow? Try this quietly, right where you are. Bring to mind one thing in your life you are currently afraid to lose. Do not judge yourself for the fear. Just notice it clearly. Ask yourself honestly, is my peace right now dependent on this thing remaining exactly as it is? Sit with the discomfort of that question. Do not rush to resolve it. The sitting itself is the practice. Rabia al-Adawiya, centuries earlier, was known for describing her worship as something that had nothing to do with the fear of punishment or the desire for reward. She spoke of loving the divine for the sake of that love alone. This is not simply a beautiful sentiment. It is a diagnostic tool. Ask yourself honestly, do I obey, do I pray, do I behave well because I am negotiating for outcomes? Or because something in me has genuinely turned toward what is real regardless of what I receive? Most of us, if we are honest, are constantly negotiating. Even our prayers can quietly become transactions. Ya Allah, if you give me this, I will do that. There is nothing wrong with asking sincerely. Asking is itself an act of fact, an admission of dependence. But watch the subtle difference between sincere asking and anxious bargaining. One rests in trust even while requesting. The other grips tightly, terrified of a no. Here is a story worth letting settle slowly. A traveler was making a long and difficult journey across harsh terrain. At every stop, afraid of running out of provisions, he picked up more stones, believing each one might somehow become useful. By the time he reached the higher paths, his bag was unbearably heavy. He was exhausted, his shoulders aching, his pace slowing with every step. An old man watching him asked why he carried so much. The traveler said he was afraid of arriving unprepared. The old man asked him a single question. Prepared for what exactly? If the weight itself is what is preventing you from arriving at all. The stones are not evil. They are not even necessarily useless. But the traveler's relationship to them had shifted from carrying to being carried by them. This is the exact difference Ibn Arabi points toward when he speaks of the poverty of all created things. It is not that possessions are forbidden. It is that we were never meant to build our entire sense of safety on top of them. Notice what happens inside you when you imagine losing something you currently define yourself by. A role, a title, a relationship, a community's approval. If there was a sudden collapse of that thing tomorrow, what would remain of you? Do not answer this too quickly. Let the discomfort of the question do its work before you try to resolve it with reassurance. This is the fear of becoming nothing, and it sits underneath almost every form of anxious grasping in modern life. We check our phones because silence from another person threatens to reveal how much of our identity depends on being noticed. We compare our lives to strangers online because stillness in our own life feels unbearable without external confirmation that we are doing well. We control tomorrow in our minds at 3 in the morning because uncertainty feels like exposure, like standing without armor. But Ibn Arabi's teaching suggests something almost paradoxical here. The fear of becoming nothing is actually pointing you toward the exact threshold of the deepest freedom available to a human being. Because it is precisely when a person stops needing to be someone, stops needing an outcome, stops needing recognition, possession, or certainty, that they finally become capable of receiving reality exactly as it is, without distortion, without demand. This is not emptiness in the sense of despair. It is emptiness in the sense of an open hand. A closed fist cannot receive anything new. It can only protect what it already holds, and even that protection is an illusion, since everything held eventually slips away regardless of how tightly we grip it. An open hand looks vulnerable. It looks exposed. But it is the only hand capable of receiving what is actually being given in this moment. Now we return to the question we left unanswered at the very beginning. What happens the moment you need nothing? It is not that circumstances become perfect. It is not that pain disappears or that loss stops hurting. Ibn Arabi never taught that spiritual realization removes human sensitivity. He wept, he grieved. He experienced hardship like any other human being. What changes is not the presence of difficulty. What changes is your relationship to it. When you no longer need life to arrange itself a certain way in order for you to feel safe, life stops feeling like a battlefield and starts feeling like a conversation. You still act. You still plan. You still love deeply and work diligently. But the desperate undertow beneath your actions quiets down. You are no longer negotiating with existence from a position of lack. You are meeting it from a position of sufficiency that was never actually yours to begin with. It belongs to the one who is genuinely free of all need. And your only real task was to remember that you were always borrowing your sufficiency from that source, not manufacturing it yourself. This is the deepest meaning behind the poverty the mystics speak of. It is not the poverty of the beggar in the street. It is the poverty of a soul that has finally admitted the truth it always secretly knew. That it was never self-sufficient, that its breath, its next moment, its very sense of self, was always a gift renewed continuously, rather than a possession secured permanently. And strangely, admitting this does not create despair. It creates rest. There is a quiet exercise worth carrying with you after this. Tonight, before sleep, sit in stillness for a few minutes. Ask yourself plainly, what am I afraid to lose right now? Do not answer with your mind immediately. Let the honest answer surface slowly. Then say, quietly and sincerely, Alhamdulillah, not as a performance, not as a spiritual habit, but as a genuine acknowledgement that whatever you have was never truly yours to lose in the way you feared. It was always on loan. The moment you need nothing does not arrive through force. It arrives through honest seeing, through noticing, again and again, every time your grip tightens, every time your peace becomes conditional on an outcome you cannot control. Each time you notice, you are given a small, quiet choice, to tighten further or to open your hand just slightly. So here is the question to carry with you, long after this video ends. If everything you are currently holding on to so tightly was gently taken from your hands tonight, what would still remain of you? And would that remaining part be enough to stand on? Sit with that question honestly. Do not answer it for the comments below, because you think it sounds impressive. Answer it because something in you already knows the truth, and it has simply been waiting for enough silence to be heard. If this reflection touched something real in you, share it below, not as a performance, but as a small act of honesty with yourself and with others walking the same road.